Okay, Oriq, I think I've heard enough. We don't take kindly to meddlers in this town or those who seek to disrupt the peace. If we were a proper city, we'd get the closest, least busy Dragon's Guard to sort you out. But we're just a small farming village, so we've learned to deal with strangers ourselves. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Ether Hub. I'm Sabin, bringing you another tabletop tale. Today, I, being a professor in the Lorehold College in the prestigious Strixhaven School of Mages, would like to present to you the continued story of Strixhaven. Lukka. We were a little bit surprised when you appeared in our last story for Strixhaven, but now we get to get a little bit of peek into what you're doing here. In our last story, we learned about Liliana Vess and her plan to resurrect Gideon on Strixhaven and why she came here in the first place, but she's aware of another threat, the Oriq, this group of dark mages who use forbidden magic who look to strike out against Strixhaven, so her attentions are now turning towards this threat in particular. As we see Liliana turn towards this threat to face it, we see Lukka heading towards it. Three weeks earlier, before Lukka met the Oriq mages, before they kidnapped him in fact, he squinted against the light, his stomach still churning from planeswalking, never a pleasant sensation. Across the grassy field ahead of him was a small village. He could see a few people milling about. One woman was waving her hands over her row of tilled earth, muttering a growth spell, while another ordered what looked like a mud construct to drag a plow through the field. He wandered through the unpaved streets until the smell of food drew him into the inn. Ignoring the stares and whispers of the people seated at the squat wooden tables, Lukka sat down at the wooden bar. "Looking for something, stranger?" said the innkeeper, a round man with a head of robust curls. "A hot meal," said Lukka. The innkeeper hesitated, as though about to say something, then nodded and moved toward the kitchen. "Haven't seen any clothes like that before," came a voice behind Lukka. "You're not from around here, I imagine." He turned. A tall man in some rough clothing, as the rest of the townsfolk had, stood up at his table and was walking over. "No," said Lukka, turning away. "Guess I'm not. You know who they say dress strange and act stranger, coming through little towns like ours to recruit? The Oriq," said the man behind him. His tone was far from friendly. "I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe, maybe not. Where are you from then?" Lukka kept his eyes straight ahead, not bothering to even look at the loudmouth man. "You wouldn't know it." He heard the man suck his teeth. The innkeeper still hadn't returned from the kitchen. Lukka was starting to doubt he ever would. "Okay, Oriq, I think I've heard enough. We don't take kindly to meddlers in this town, or those who seek to disrupt the peace. If we were a proper city, we'd get the closest, least busy Dragon's Guard to sort you out. But we're just a small farming village, so we've learned to deal with strangers ourselves." Lukka felt rather than saw the rush of magic as the man began a spell. "Is everyone a damn mage on this plane?" He turned, and in one fluid motion smashed his fist into the man's jaw. The man dropped limply. The wispy energy curled around one hand, dissipating. Lukka had an instant to breathe before another man crushed through the door of the inn, a ball of flame hovering above one outstretched hand. Lukka got a few steps away before a firebolt splashed against the back of his coat, knocking him through the glass of a nearby window and into the street. The stink of charred leather filled his nose, mingling with the searing pain across his shoulders. Lukka snarled and cast his senses out over the village, finding every vulnerable mind he could. He called to them, stumbling back to his feet. The fireball throwing man had left the inn and was joined outside by two other burly looking townsfolk. "Where are your friends? We know the Oriq scum like you like to travel in packs." "Oh, they'll be coming along any minute now," said Lukka. The man lifted his hand and began to fill it once again with fire. Before he could finish, a dog leapt through the air, its sharp teeth flashing as they sank into the man's arm. The man screamed, the flames sputtering out as he fought to free himself. He managed to tear his arm free just as a horse charged at him. He and his companions dove out of the way, but the horse followed them, spurred on by Lukka's rage. It reared back and brought its hooves down hard. Lukka's smirk faded as hunger shot through his stomach, his mind absently following the fight through the beasts until the noise faded behind him. Lukka stumbled as he moved across the stony ledge, minding his step along the edge of a sheer cliff. Far below, short grass and scrawny trees held on bitterly to life. His hunger had only gotten worse, tightening his stomach more and more with each and every shaky step. Whatever food he'd managed to hunt down was long gone, and he'd run out of water hours ago. The ledge suddenly gave way beneath him, crumbling into loose stone. Lukka cried out as his ankle twisted. He threw out his hands, reaching for anything to save him from the long fall, and his fingers caught on the edge of a sharp, flat stone. Gritting his teeth, he pulled himself up to the side of the cliff, his legs scrambling for purchase, and finally threw himself back into the stone shelf. He lay there for what felt like an eternity, his lungs burning as he sucked in gulps of air. Thoughts of his near demise faded as his gaze caught on the rocks that had saved him. It floated in the air, the end facing him smooth and curved. Lukka stood up, finding more of the odd rocks hovering around the side of the cliff. Together they formed a half circle, as if the rest of them were lost within the cliff itself. A small noise grabbed his attention. Lukka tensed, ready for trouble, but as it came again, it seemed a pitiful sound, soft and weak. Lukka followed it until he found a pile of stones. He dropped to his knees, pushing one of the stones away. A pair of golden eyes looked back at him. The creature gave a miserable yelp, blinking against the light. As Lukka shoved the rest of the stones aside, he saw her gray fur was dirty, covering the spots that ran in a camouflage pattern along her back. A long gash ran across the creature's snout, and something had taken a chunk out of one of her long, pointed ears. Free now, the fox-like creature limped past the stones Lukka had moved, putting more space between them. He sat down hard, the strength of his legs finally giving out. He felt faint. Go on then, get. The fox turned and darted around the curve of the cliff just as consciousness slipped away from Lukka. When he woke, the first thing he registered was her presence. He kept still, slowly opening one eye. She sat on her haunches a few paces away, staring at him. Then her eyes flickered to the ground beside him. Lukka followed her gaze. A pile of berries and nuts lay beside his leg. Thank you. The fox tensed, rising to her feet. Lukka stared and raised a hand, but stopped himself. He stared at her, the silence stretching as the first sun began to rise in the distance. Finally, Lukka took a deep breath and cast out his bonder's sense. The warm brush of fur caressed his mind as the link between them settled. It had been a while since he used his gentler magic, not for a servant, but for a partner. He hadn't even realized how much he missed it. In the distance, Lukka could make out the curling tail of smoke from a chimney somewhere beyond the woodland. In another world, another plane, he would have felt relief. Finally, somewhere soft to rest his head and somewhere to get a decent meal where he wouldn't have to mind control rabbits into letting him break their necks. But here, in Arcavios, he knew he'd just get treated the same suspicious way they had been treated everywhere else. The people of this plane hated everything new, everything they didn't understand. Like those Oriq, the masked mages who used magic forbidden by the colleges of Strixhaven. Whatever that meant. Every villager seemed to think there was an Oriq agent hiding under their bed. In some ways, it reminded him of home, of the way General Kudro had looked at him when Lukka had first shown his bonder magic. This was a place ruled by fear. The sound of raised voices pulled Lukka from his thoughts. He followed them to the other side of the ridge. Down below, he could see a woman wearing immaculate robes facing a group of masked individuals. Purple, wispy smoke curled and danced across their covered features. All wore hoods, turning their silhouette alien and inhuman. The woman didn't appear concerned to be outnumbered 4-1. Stitched into her robes, Lukka could make out the stylized form of a dragon. Ah, the Dragon's Guard I've heard so much about. Elite mages that had studied at the back and claw of those scaly old reptiles. This is your last chance, the woman was saying. Turn yourselves in and... The masked figures didn't wait for her to finish. One shot out a hand, a coil of dripping purple energy snaping out towards her. The Dragon's Guard flicked her wrist effortlessly. There was a bright flash and suddenly the coil of dark magic was flying, right at Lukka. He ducked just in time, the spell hissing horribly as it flew overhead and hit a tree to his right. At once, the trunk began to blacken as rot spread out from the point of impact. Bits of dead leaves rained down into the clearing, and the sound of crackling wood signaled imminent collapse. Lukka leapt out of the way just as the top of the tree splintered off and landed where he had been standing. That could have killed me! He couldn't decide who to be mad at, the one who had cast the spell in the first place or the one who had redirected it towards him. He settled on both. Lukka cast his senses out into the forest, snagging on a bear claws deep in a berry bush. Further, his senses grabbed the wolves dozing as they waited for nightfall, and he jerked them to wakefulness. Further still, he felt the strange fervor of a creature that had already been creeping towards the clearing, drawn to the lure of magic? Lukka frowned but kept his focus. Connecting with the nearby beasts, he summoned each and every one to the clearing. The Oriq agents meanwhile spread out and surrounded the Dragon's Guard. One of them threw a ball of crackling black flame towards her. With a gesture, she turned it into stone, and it dropped out of the air harmlessly. Another conjured what looked to be a snake made of glittering silvery liquid. With a spoken word, the Dragon's Guard caused a massive clod of dirt and grass, shaped surprisingly like a mongoose, to rip its way free of the ground before pouncing on the arcane serpent. Even Lukka found himself impressed by how effortlessly she seemed to answer whatever spells they could throw at her. Behind her, a wolf pounced from the tree line, teeth bared savagely. This one almost seemed to catch the woman by surprise, but before it could reach her throat, she sealed the beast in a greenish bubble and floated off into the air, raging helplessly against its containment. "So it's true," said the Dragon's Guard, turning to look at him on the ridge. "We have heard of an Oriq with your abilities." "For the last time, I'm not a damn Oriq." As if to drive home this point, the bear burst through the tree line where the masked figures were standing and made them scramble as it swiped wildly with its huge clawing paws. One of them threw a hex over his shoulder as he fled, withering the animal's arm and causing it to roar in pain. This sound was joined by a far less familiar sound. Lukka looked over to see the strange creature with whom he had connected burst forth from the tree line. It skittered across the clearing on 6 legs, disturbingly quick. Glowing tendrils waved from its head as if underwater. With single-minded focus, it made straight for the Dragon's Guard. This was a foe she seemed to take seriously. Lukka watched her set her feet and contort her hands in an arcane position. She spoke a word, and roots as thick as his arm burst from the ground, wrapping around the legs of the creature. He heard the snapping of limbs as it was dragged down into the earth, screeching all the while, until the soil covered the insectile thing with an awful finality. Lukka was so drawn in by the spectacle, he didn't notice the root creeping around his own ankle as it yanked him into the soil and down waist deep. He pressed on either side of himself, trying to lift himself free, but to no effect. The Dragon's Guard sauntered over to him, clearly in no rush. "Nice trick, but at the end of the day, you're nothing more than an untrained hedge mage, just like any other Oriq." She extended one open palm towards him. Something blurred at the edge of Lukka's vision. A second later, the Dragon's Guard screamed. There was a blooming of heat and a bright wash of flame, and he turned away, shielding his face with one hand. When he looked back, a familiar shape stood over the Dragon's Guard's still body, her fiery tail twitching as she sniffed at her fallen opponent. When she was satisfied, the fox-like creature turned and looked at Lukka, her big eyes oddly knowing. Lukka held the beast's gaze for a moment before looking around the clearing. The Oriq agents were gone. If he hadn't been there, they wouldn't have lasted more than a minute or two. No discipline, no strategy, just a bunch of scary costumes. Lukka dragged himself to his feet and scanned the ground nearby. Obviously, the Oriq agents had left a trail in their haste to get away. He easily spotted the signs the masked mages had left in their wake. If everyone who didn't play by the rules here was an Oriq, then maybe he was one of them after all. He was about to start following the trail when a soft yelp made him pause. Lukka turned to find the fox-like creature sitting in the clearing. She blinked and cocked her head to one side. Lukka turned and shook his head resigned. Fine. He closed his eyes and reached out with his mind. The fox's own mind seemed to leap to meet his, and then his bond softly slipped back into place. Lukka let himself relive the sense of relief and gratitude he'd felt when he'd seen her fly to his guard. He opened his eyes to find the creature watching him, her tongue hanging over the side of her blood-stained maw. She trotted over to the Oriq's trail and sniffed at one of the tracks. "Well, if you're going to stick around, then I'll need to call you something. How about Mila?" He felt the pleasant ring of recognition in her mind and nodded. Alright students, loads to cover in our lesson wrap up today, so who can give me the TLDR of this story? If you answered Lukka is a weird guy whose loneliness drove him to join a cult, then you're close enough to earn some extra credit. Yeah, Lukka is just so weirdly used in this story, like, come on. He has eyes, right? I get that he was attacked by a bunch of drunk mages, but is that really enough for him to join a dangerous death cult? I mean, there's no other reason he presented outside of, well, they're outcasts, so they're like me, so why not? He was taking a neutral stance towards almost everything here, but because one mage had one spell ricochet in his direction, he's like, screw it, evil mode it is. Lukka is very angsty, so it kinda works, but I want to feel for the guy. I want his anti-hero tendencies to be used more fluidly, and this just doesn't feel right. I want to love him for his bonding of animals and know that he can love and be loved in return, but they couple it with joining a death cult for no real reason. In this story, we also see the first depiction of the mage hunters, these beasts used by the Oriq to attack other mages as they're drawn to the scent of arcane magic. It's obvious why the Oriq would be interested in someone like Lukka, who can control monsters and beasts, to act as a general for the mage hunter assault on Strixhaven, but the real question is, what can the Oriq say to convince Lukka to go ahead with such a plot? Or is Lukka's mind so far gone that he'll just attack kids just for the hell of it? Anyway, everyone, class is out of time for today. As a pop quiz, please make sure you let me know in the comment below what you think of the story thus far. For extra credit, be sure to leave this video a like, subscribe, and tick that notification bell. Want to become a teacher's pet? Be sure to check out our Patreon page linked in the description below. As always, students, thank you so much for attending Lorehold College, and until next time, class dismissed.